And welcome back to the Hot Lap. We are talking, yes, once again, hopefully for the last time, the Lando Norris versus Max Verstappen controversy, and Martin Brundle and, funny enough, John Alesi have their takes on it, which I want to go through. Some of it could be quite interesting. A few talking points. Let's go. So here's the headline here from the Sky. Brundle calls for rule changes after the Norris Verstappen incident. He's reflecting on what is a contentious penalty at the very least. Let's be fair, contentious. Not everyone agrees. Having said that, it makes for interesting talking points. So as you know, Norris was given a penalty for overtaking Max Verstappen off the track after Max pushed him off the track. And he also talks about how Ferrari's 1-2 has reignited a three-way fight for the constructors, not necessarily the title. And he starts saying, I must start this, Colin, by congratulating Charles Leclerc on a tremendous victory in Austin. And that's the sad thing about this Lando Norris versus Max Verstappen controversy on lap 52, simply because it takes away from what was an absolutely amazing, almost plot twist-like job. Coming into America, who thought Ferrari would get a 1-2? I don't think anyone would have bet on it. You know, maybe a fleeting bet, but no serious contenders. And then they did. So he said, as we head into Mexico, just 48 points cover McLaren, Red Bull, Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship. And that's going to be super exciting and tense in the closing stages. He said Verstappen won the sprint from pole position. He did a fine job to the point where we were all pretty much convinced after winning the sprint, we're like, yeah, he's going to win the whole thing. He didn't. Tyres were probably the word of the day. And he said the sprint format, he's saying that it did a really good job. And it did a really good job. It was quite an exciting sprint. And as Martin Brundle always says, for anyone that doesn't like the sprints, I understand. However, and the big caveat here is, but it is better than another practice session. Absolutely. It is. So one criticism, though, of the sprint, he said, is that it simply telegraphs what's going to happen following the main day in the race. But this is not particularly the case. This one, especially with this year's change to the format that allows cars, and I think this is so important, allowing cars out of Parc Ferme and change between the Saturday sprint race and qualifying. I think that's really important. The sprint in Austin is over 19 laps compared to the race distance of 56 laps, and therefore much less fuel is carried at the start. He said the sprint is also about going as fast as possible. So Norris, he said, delivered a stunning pole lap for pole position. It was not as good as what Max's lap may or may not have been. We will never know. Now, some people have suggested by the time the yellow flags come out and he had to go, he was actually slightly off, despite that stunning first sector. On the second and final one, Q3 Norris looked like he'd struggled to beat his first effort, but Verstappen appeared to improve. He goes, at the start of the Grand Prix, everyone got away in unison. Norris had to defend the inside, but let's be fair, he left a Max Verstappen gap, and let's be honest, any Max Verstappen is going to go through a Max Verstappen gap. So when you look at why Lando Norris finished behind Max Verstappen, yes, that penalty, whatever way you look at it, it wasn't a good situation. However, how much blame do you have to put on Lando Norris at the start for leaving that gap? Now, the big caveat is Verstappen did push him off the track. So, meanwhile, and all this opened up for Charles Leclerc. Hamilton suffered, as he said, as Martin Brundle said, an absolutely miserable race, miserable weekend. And it was a rare mistake. Now, when we looked back, in terms of unforced errors, spinning on his own, we're not battling. It only happened one other time in 2009 at Monza. That was courtesy of Cameron F1, which I was watching the other day, which was brilliant. So, yeah, I was just as amazed as him. Now, it's way too early to grab a cheap pit stop under the safety car. So, obviously, Brundle was saying no one pitted. So, with 6 lap younger tyres towards the end, Norris set off after Verstappen. Now, he came out 6.4 seconds behind. And he said, after a string of laps, which was textbook attacks by Norris and defending by Verstappen, particularly with regard to car placement, it was all fair enough. But he said on lap 52, Norris was closer than ever, exiting the turn 11 hairpin, and a pass seemed inevitable. Just like Thanos. Now, Verstappen moved to the left on the back straight and a bit of jiggling of the wheel at top speed, which did not constitute a double move. So, no, it didn't, guys. He coaxed Norris to the right-hand side and he moved largely past. He said this would put Norris on the outside for the next left-hand turn at turn 12. Verstappen braked later, sailed back on the inside in an attempt to reclaim position, and this is where it all gets messy, he said. As they exited the corner, Verstappen ran marginally outside of track limits, with Norris much wider. Lando floored the throttle and steamed through the runoff area to take third place, much to Max, well, the detriment of Max, let's say. He said, there are track limit infringement sporting regulations to define the field of play. They are the F1 driving guidelines. And he said, as far as I'm concerned, the 6-page guidelines, not regulations, he would say they're guidelines, which is interesting, which have been signed off by the FIA and the GPDA and the teams and the blueprint to dissuade overtaking, especially around the outside. There are key reference points that are hard to define for both drivers and stewards, such as where exactly is the apex of any given corner across the entire width of the track, along with specific front axle and car mirror positions in a fast-moving event such as an overtake. He said, moreover, a driver can game the system, for example, by accelerating and running wide, thereby ensuring the overtaking driver on the inside is penalised for not allowing them a fair and acceptable width. I don't know what happened to the let them race approach from a while back, which worked reasonably well. It did most of the time. I agree. As far as I'm concerned, if you pass a car on the inside of the corner while remaining under control and not locked up and keeping within the track confines, then you have won the corner. Agreed. And can take the normal line through the exit. And it's up to the driver who has been passed to yield, not to hit the throttle and inevitably run wide. George Russell took an unreasonable penalty for this in Austin because the guidelines had to be applied, as have others. He said if Russell was penalised for running Valtteri Bottas wide, shouldn't Verstappen have been penalised for running Norris wide at the same corner, Brundle says. And here's another question. Given Norris passed Verstappen down the outside before turn 12, when Verstappen sailed back on the inside, who was actually doing the overtaking at the corner apex? Verstappen or Norris, which is my point exactly. It's even more complicated than that, he says. Norris running wide was his fourth track limit, indiscretion, which means, yes, as we know, an automatic 5-second penalty. It seems inconceivable to me that if a driver is forced wide, that counts as a track limit strike. It shouldn't be, but I'm assured it does. Ridiculous. But Norris wasn't given an extra 5-second penalty track limits because that would have been considered double jeopardy with his penalty for overtaking off track, which he undoubtedly did. He said the standard for passing off track is 10 seconds, but mitigating circumstances can be applied. Like most refereeing decisions, there are so many variables here and room for human interpretation. And he said, and yet there's more. The stewards are under pressure to make speedy decisions so that penalties can be applied essentially before the end of the race. And he says, furthermore, where podium positions are concerned, especially close to the end of the race, there's even more pressure to make a fast call. Perhaps that's a price worth paying if the drivers and teams are allowed to make their considered cases post-race, and the stewards can have more time to think and reflect before making a decision. If we did pause it. And he said, we witnessed back at the Austrian Grand Prix the same, where a simple channel of gravel and other circuit furniture can dissuade drivers driving off the defined racetrack without having high curbs, which can dangerously launch cars in the air, which we've seen. And he talked about the circuit layoffs, etc. But yeah, I completely agree with Martin Brundle there. He is, in my opinion, he is absolutely right. 110%. And it's quite sensible. But I also understand people that have a differing opinion, but this is one of those things. I don't think there's an absolutely 100% right answer, even with the guidelines, because the guidelines don't negate the fact that you're driving a corner, the guy passes me on the outside as we're coming into the braking zone, so I'm just going to let my braking go, outbrake myself almost. Yes, I hit the apex, but I'm not going to make the corner on the other side, and I'm going to run off because I got too much speed, which is what I believe Max Verstappen did. The rules don't negate for that. So you can make, some people say it's genius of Max Verstappen. I don't think it is. I just think he's being unfair. And Jean, so let's talk about Jean Alesi, shall we? He said foul under the microscope with scandalous Norris penalty scrutinised. Yes, clickbaity headlines. He's a former Ferrari driver, John Alesi. He's questioned why Max Verstappen's extreme and foul defence went under the radar. As we know, he was hit with a 5-second penalty. And let's scroll all the way down, because even Christian Horner was unmoved, insisting it was very much a black and white scenario. No, Christian, it wasn't, but understandably, Christian Horner defends his drivers, and he's Christian Horner. Now, writing in a column for the Italian publication, Corriere della Sera, I probably got that wrong, but Alesi described Norris's penalty as inexplicable, and described Verstappen's defence as foul. He said, many spectacular duels and a scandalous race direction, especially towards Norris. Okay, so at the start, Verstappen may have tried to get in front without intending to damage the others with cold brakes to boot, talking about the beginning of the race. But he said, but the penalty to Lando in the finale is inexplicable. Max avoids cornering at the moment he is overtaken. It is he who takes McLaren off the track, going off 4 wheels in turn. Where would the Englishman have taken advantage? It is not known. Max had the advantage with an extreme foul and moreover rewarded defence. I believe this is probably translated, but still. He said, I think the rules should be applied at all times and for everyone. Otherwise, the driver should be left free for the pleasure of the onlooker. Leclerc eased to his 8th career victory there, and he added, what joy, what satisfaction, 2 races Saturday and Sunday to get growing the measure of Ferrari's consistency. And for that, John, I completely agree with you there. So there you go. But what do you guys think? Comment below, let me know. And I know a lot of you have commented. To be fair, I probably have had more people in defence of Verstappen than Lando Norris, even though when I look online, it really does feel 50-50. But whatever it is, everyone's really passionate about it. Everyone is talking F1. So I guess from something controversial, maybe, let's say, that splits the F1 community in two, it is interesting to talk about it, isn't it? Providing everyone's polite, of course. And everyone has been on the comments. So thank you. Even if you disagree with me, 99.9% of you have been absolutely fantastic. I love it. So thank you very much for commenting. As I said, even if you're like, what is this guy talking about? And we'll speak to you next time. Thank you very much.